Hello, fifth graders. Today we are looking at adding and subtracting mixed numbers. In our other videos with fractions, we've learned how to add and subtract fractions, and mixed numbers isn't too different, especially when we focus on adding. So first, let's review what a mixed number is. A mixed number is any number with a fraction. So 2 and 3/4 would be a mixed number. Now, in your notebook, copy this down, but let's pretend we wanted to add this to another mixed number. So we're gonna look at the mixed number 3 and 1/4. So the first thing we wanna do is take a look at the whole numbers, and we can start with adding those. So we could do 3 plus 2 is 5. And because we have common denominators, they're both 4, that means we're allowed to add these fractions together, and that denominator is not going to change. Make sure you don't add those denominators together. We are going to add the numerators together, the top number parts of the fraction. So that is 3 plus 1 equals 4. Now, we actually have an answer here, 5 and 4/4, but if you remember, 4/4 looks a lot like one of our makeup artists, and we know that all of our makeup artists are equal to 1 whole. So 5 and 4/4 is the same as 5 and 1 whole, or 5 plus 1. So our final answer here is 6. Now let's take a look at a similar one. Let's try 2 and 5/6 plus 3 and 1/4. Now this time, if we add the whole numbers together, we get 5, but we can't add these two fractions together because they have different denominators. So what's the first thing we need to do? Do you remember? Well, if you said least common denominator, you are correct. So we're gonna look at each denominator. So we have a 6, and the bottom fraction is a 4. And we are gonna skip count to find our least common denominator. So we're gonna go 6 and 12 and 18. And then for 4, we got 4, 8, 12. If we see a common number, we're gonna circle it, and that's gonna be our least common number, our least common denominator. So we wanna make each of these fractions into a 12th. So now we gotta think about those makeup artists. Let's start with this bottom fraction. So how do we get from 4 to 12? Well, I know 4 times 3 equals 12. And whatever you do to the bottom, you got to do to the top. So 1 times 3 is 3. So that means 1/4 is the same as 3/12. Okay, let's look at the top one. How do you get from 6 to 12? Well, I know 6 times 2 equals 12. Whatever you do to the bottom, you got to do to the top. 5 times 2 is 10. So now we have two fractions that are both 12ths, which means my answer is going to be in the 12ths. 10 plus 3, we add the numerators, and we get 13. Now, we have 5 and 13/12. A fraction like this is an improper fraction, the 13/12. So what could we do with 13/12? Well, we can think, how many 12ths can we take out of 13? And that would be 1/12 out of 13. I'm sorry, 12/12 out of 13, which equals 1 whole. But that's one set of that. So what's left over once we take away 12 from the 13? There's 1 left over, and then we keep the same denominator. Now to go in reverse, we would take the whole number here, 1, multiply it by the denominator of 12, which gives us 12, and then we add the numerator. So 1 times 12 is 12, plus 1 is 13, which gets us back to 13/12. But let's look at this, 1 and 1/12. So we can add that now to our whole number 5, because this 1 and 1/12 is the same as 13/12. So instead of 5 and 13/12, I can think of it as 5 plus 1 and 1/12. I add the whole numbers together and get 6, and then our fraction is 1/12. Now, what about subtraction? Let's take a look at this. 4 and 3/4, 4 and 3/5 minus 2 and 1/3. Okay, what's the first thing we need to do here? LCD. So, because we have uncommon denominators right now, we need to make them common. So we have 5 and 3. I'm going to skip count. And I know that 15 is a multiple of 3. But I'll still write this out. We got 15ths. So we need to make each of these fractions look like a 15th. How do I get from 3 to 15? I multiply by 5. So we're going to be multiplying by 5/5. And up here, how do you get from 5 to 15? Multiply by 3. So that's going to be multiplied by 3/3. So 3 times 3 up top is 9. Okay, now we are subtracting. So 4 minus 2, if we look at the whole numbers, equals 2. 9/15 minus 5/15. We still keep the same denominator. Now we do subtract the numerators. 9 minus 5 is 4. So we end up with 2 and 4/15. Okay, for our last section today, we're going to look at a more challenging problem, and we're going to talk about how we deal with that. So for this last problem, I want you to write down 8 and 1/6 minus 4 and 3/4. So if you want to pause the video here and see if you can solve this on your own, I would suggest doing that now. And I'm going to keep going here. So what's the first thing we want to do? Well, we notice that the denominators are different. So we want to find the least common denominator. We label them. We skip count. We know we need 12ths. Okay, how do I get from 4 to 12? I'm going to multiply by this makeup artist, 3/3. 3 times 3 is 9. And this, how do you get from 6 to 12? We're going to multiply by 2/2. 1 times 2 is 2. Now, do you notice a problem here? Well, if I notice looking at the numerators, I can't do 2/12 minus 9/12. I can't take away 9 if there's only 2 to begin with. So do you have any ideas on what we could do here? Well, remember, we have our whole number here. So we could borrow 1 from the 8 and make the 8 a 7. And that 1 that we're going to borrow, we're going to turn that 1 into 12ths. So 1 equals how many 12ths? Well, remember, any fraction over itself is equal to 1. So 1 would be equal to 12 12ths. Now, why am I doing 12ths? Because that's our denominator. If our denominator was 4ths, then I would take the 1 that I borrowed and turned it into 4/4. So this 1, we're going to add to this. So what's 12 12ths plus 2 12ths? We're going to end up with 7 and 14 12ths. So take a look at this and take a look at the steps that we did. So we borrowed 1 from the 8 to make it 7. That's where we get our 7 down here. And then that 1 that we borrowed, we turned it into 12 12ths so we could add it to the 2 12ths. Now we're able to do our subtraction. So we have 4 and 9 12ths. 14 12ths minus 9 12ths is 5 12ths. And 7 minus 4 is 3.